Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos, The Brief. It's our weekly show about politics. I'm Markos and Kerry. I'm here with Kerry Eleveld. And if you've been paying any attention to the news, and maybe even if you haven't, there's a massive disturbance in the force.
A massive disturbance
Holy
is right.
shit.
That's yes.
Kerry, we knew that Roe v. Wade was what's going to be struck down by this conservative Supreme Court, and yet on Monday evening, Justice Alito's draft opinion banning or eliminating Roe v. Wade was leaked to the press, and no matter how much you expected this decision, the impact was still a gut punch.
Right. Let's emphasize that this is a draft opinion, okay? But I think everybody's authenticated. I mean, the Supreme Court actually came out and said, yes, it's real. So we know it's real. We know it was a real draft opinion. The question is whether it manages to get toned down at all before it lands in probably June. But, one way or the other, 5 justices have voted to overturn. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a concurring opinion from Chief Justice Roberts, who will agree, but but it's done, and it's just a matter of this is the way it's written is. From what I understand, and I'm not a legal scholar. I just have read a little bit about
Kerry, before you get into those details, I just want to let everybody know that our guest today is going to be Christine Pelosi. She is a trainer, campaign trainer, organizer, and just really deeply involved in Democratic Party politics. And we're going to talk to her about the electoral ramifications of this decision as somebody who's actually working with campaigns right now on the ground, training them.
Who actually trains candidates and works with campaigns, and I'm sure is privy to a lot of polling. I mean, we have a lot of public polling, but it wouldn't. Yeah. Hey, maybe she wants to drop some internals on us that no one else knows. You never know. You got to ask. Anyway.
So she'll be on in about 10 minutes. And so, yeah, setting the stage, Kerry, you were saying, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So this is just classic Alito. He's wanted to strike this down from the beginning. He finally gets his chance. Finally, he gets a chance to write it. It's what Mark Joseph Stern of Slate called a maximal assault on sort of all progressive constitutional decisions, basically, and so and everything will be, this is just the beginning for the right-wing conservative movement. They are going to go after contraception. They are going to go after LGBTQ rights, the same-sex marriage decision. He also took Alito in the decision, took a slap at Lawrence v. Texas, which is basically the really first big LGBTQ rights win at the Supreme Court in 2003 that made it that said that same-sex couples have the right to privacy to have to have sex in their own bedrooms.
Sodomy laws apply to anybody having non-marital, maybe not even non-procreational sex. Right. Including anal sex and oral sex. But of course, it was mostly targeted towards gay couples, same-sex couples. So
I mean, way before you have the Obergefell decision in 2015 legalizing same-sex marriage or striking down same-sex marriage bans across the country, you have this foundational decision that sort of what opened up, the possibility of moving on, which was Lawrence v. Texas in 2003. And Alito took a specific swipe at both of those. But you got to remember, I'm pretty sure, and again, I'm not a legal scholar. I mean, you're trained as are you trained?
Yeah, but I'm not a legal scholar.
Yeah. Well, you've got more legal training than I do, but I'm pretty sure that Lawrence was premised on Griswold, which is the contraception. I mean, Griswold v. Connecticut was the contraception decision that conferred privacy rights, without excessive governmental, influence or prying, back in 1965. So, if you're gonna say, oh, well, Lawrence is no good and Obergefell is no good, and and then he tried to do some gymnastics, as you said, to say, oh, but the ruling on interracial marriage,
that one's kosher.
Saying, yeah, that's fine. And
no, he doesn't say it by name, but he sort of says other decisions are okay, just not the ones dealing with gay people. I mean, that was sort of the functionally what he says.
And forget about it. I'm telling you, as someone who spent, 10 to 15 years sort of covering the gay movement, it's so clear how much LGBTQ politics is related back to gender and and sex. And so if you're going to, there's not a single doubt in my mind that after they get through slicing and dicing rights for LGBTQ Americans, they are going to go after contraception. They're going to go after every other, they're going to go after everyone who's not male and white and Christian.
Kerry, so this is important because people are going to be like, oh, you're exaggerating, or it's hyperbole, or because we've seen that perpetually over the last few years. People just are dismissing Republicans aren't that bad, and they're not comparing them to a Handmaid's Tales going too far. Here is the exact words he used to describe both the right to abortion and a right, and like you said, Lawrence, which legalized sodomy, and Obergefell, which legalized same-sex marriage. He said that those are phony rights because, quote, they are not deeply rooted in history. That is his standard, deeply rooted in history. So we don't have to exaggerate to understand what he's saying. That when in 1776, when Declaration of Independence, there were slaves. Slavery was deeply rooted in history. When he talks about abortion and why it's not deeply rooted in history, he talks about how it used to be illegal until 1973 and based in the common law. And so therefore it's not deeply rooted in history, but interracial marriage was not deeply rooted in history. Women voting was not deeply rooted in history. Young people voting, not deeply rooted in history. Anybody that didn't have property voting, not deeply rooted in history. Things that were deeply rooted in history, slavery, subjugation of women. I mean, so this is his standard that he's using in this decision is one that would take us back to the Dark Ages.
Right.
And that's not exaggerating. No, it is his words.
Right.
His words.
This is opening the lockbox, right, to what we know as modern America right now. This is like for conservatives to shred what we have come to know over the last 50 years as modern America. I mean, that is what you're looking at. Okay. And it all revolves around, what is enumerated in the Constitution and what the Supreme Court has conferred on Americans as unenumerated rights, right? Rights that were not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution by name, but the Supreme Court has deemed them sort of an extension of a piece of the Constitution. Again, I'm not a constitutional law scholar, but once you get into
society evolves, things move on. Abortion did not exist in 17.
Once you get
whenever the Constitution was written,
right? Once you get into, well, if it's not explicitly written in the Constitution, then it's open season. They will go after everything that we have come to know as sort of. It's just basic modern American civilization. I mean, and I will say, so I was reading this Slate piece by Mark Joseph Stern. He's a great, he does a great job sort of breaking down these opinions and whatever. And one thing he said was, well, Alito then went to some trouble, like you were saying, of saying, well, this doesn't mean that some of these decisions are going to be, we're not going to take them all down. And what Stern wrote then is that this unreasoned disclaimer is not worth much on the heels of 62 pages shredding dozens of precedents over half a century. Alito spent 62 pages shredding dozens of precedents. That means nothing is sacrosanct anymore.
I mean, you actually gonna believe? I mean, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh both said in their hearings that Roe v. Wade was settled law. This is, Susan Collins today is acting like, oh, I didn't realize that, they lied to me. She knew damn well they were lying to her. She didn't care back then. So this idea that now we're going to take him at their word that oh no, we're not going to talk about that. For all we know, he only included that language because he's working on making sure that he's got the full majority of Republicans on the court. And I doubt that there are 6 Republicans that are willing to shred interracial marriage. Like I'm maybe I'm being overly generous with the conservative majority, but I'm going to assume that they don't have a majority to make interracial marriage illegal. So he has to do those mental gymnastics. I want to make very clear that the way he tries to explain why Obergefell and Lawrence, which target gay people, why those are not kosher, but interracial marriages, when they're all founded on the same cases.
Yeah, I honestly, I think once they get done shredding LGBTQ rights, I think they go for interracial marriage. I mean, just look at Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. He was recently asked about would you be okay with the Supreme Court leaving the issue of interracial marriage to the states? And he said, yes. He said, yes. I mean, I'm just like, quote unquote, yes. And then he said, if you are not wanting the Supreme Court to weigh in on issues like that, you are not going to be able to have your cake and eat it too. And then he tried to walk it back. Oh, I didn't understand the question. Well, the question wasn't that hard. No. Do you want interracial marriage to be a states' rights issue, to revert back to a states' rights issues? And he said, yes. Hey, you want another example? In Michigan recently, I think in February, there was a debate among the Republicans who are running for attorney general. Now, right now, there's a sitting Democrat, Dana Nessel, in that as the attorney general of Michigan, right? They were asked about the Griswold decision, the contraception decision, the right to for couples not to have interference of the government saying you can't use contraception while having sex. This is crazy, right? This is so basic. This is such basic reproductive rights situation. And they were, all 3 of them were asked about that. And all 3 of them said, oh yeah, that should be a states' rights issue. And then, and they weren't, at first they were fuzzy on, oh, I'm not sure what Griswold is, but yes, contraception should be a states' rights issue. They're talking about overturning Griswold is what they're doing. So yeah, every attorney general candidate for the Republicans in Michigan was saying that should be overturned. It should be states' rights.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And here they're saying like, oh no, all Alito is doing is pushing back to the states so the states decide. But Republicans in the Senate have legislation that would make that a federal would ban abortion at the federal level. So that's our ultimate goal and what they're trying to do. So before Pelosi comes on, I just want to make one last point. If you watch Republicans right now, you can tell who are the true believers and who are the dogs that caught the car and now don't know what to do, right? Because the true believers are celebrating. And if that leak was said that Roe had survived, we'd be celebrating, right? We'd be like, woo! You can tell Republicans are really uncomfortable because most of them are complaining about the process. They're complaining about the leak and, oh, what a breach of democratic norms that this draft decision was leaked. If they really believe this, they'd be celebrating. But they know, right? The polling is actually brutal, right? In fact, you were just looking at some numbers, right?
Yeah, we're just looking at some numbers. So like data for progress. Sorry, I'm so excited. I'm like, I can't speak. Or I shouldn't say excited, but I'm like so disrupted, as you said, massive disruption. Anyway, but there's not a single state where support for a federal ban on abortion has more than 30%, right? So no state in the nation has more than 30% support for banning abortion.
That includes Mississippi and Alabama. Yes. The entire Bible Belt, West Virginia, Indiana, Ohio, Missouri, all of those Republican red states.
Basically, from what I've read, somewhere around half the states are going to, as soon as Roe falls, are going to ban abortion almost immediately. So like that almost half of states. I mean, there could be some caveats. Maybe there will be life of the mother. Maybe there will be incest. In some states, there will be no caveats whatsoever, right?
And Kerry,
it'll be straight up abortion ban.
Yeah, and we've been talking about, yeah, this is a tough climate, but we've also talked about all the different ways that this is an atypical midterm election. And we have constantly cited the effect on the Roe decision on, its potential impact on the elections. And you made a very good point when we were sort of discussing this before the show, that none of the other prognosticators, which are mostly male, have really factored that in to the equation. And of course, now everybody's going to have to factor it in because it's right there, right? But it really shows how when the discourse is sort of shaped by just men, how you can miss sort of what is really obvious if you're following this stuff closely, and it impacts you. Right.
Right. And there's a lot of men who think this doesn't impact them. Well, if they go after contraception, it will, number one. And number two, a lot of men who aren't thinking about when they and their partner or their wife, end up getting pregnant and really want that baby. They've really picked out the colors for their room and they've been decorating and all that stuff, right? And then find out that there's something terribly wrong, tragically wrong with that baby, that it won't live past a day or that it'll be stillborn or whatever. And then live in a state where they're banned because the pregnancy is far enough along that they can't get an abortion. I mean, guys don't tend to think that this applies to them until it does apply to them. And when it applies to them, it is a terribly tragic situation, right? Where they really wanted that baby. The couple really wants that baby. And then are forced by the government to do something awful. Just like, get out of the business of being, the government should not be in the way of people's healthcare decisions, familial decisions, very, gut-wrenching familial decisions. I just it's just, so I'm this, yes, this is a women's issue because women think about this all the time. From the time that they start to menstruate, women think, hey, I could wake up pregnant one day. And women think about this all the time. And I think there's a lot of men who don't spend a lot of time thinking about it unless they have a daughter and they think, oh God. And they, it affects everybody. It's going to affect men. And a lot of them won't know it until it's too late, unless they start thinking about it. So anyway.
No, yeah, you're absolutely true. And I don't say this to minimize the effect of the abortion issue specifically, but we just talked about sort of the broader impact. And so you could be a man and this decision directly undercuts so many of the foundational rights that we depend on, even contraception, like we've talked about, right? I mean, this does affect everybody, and it sort of shows what that Republican agenda has become. So Christine Pelosi is here. She is an attorney, author, advocate. She has a lifetime of grassroots organizing and public policy experience. She's a committee woman at the National Federation of Democratic Women, the Democratic National Committee. She is the author of the Campaign Boot Camp and Campaign Boot Camp 2.0 and the Amazon bestseller, The Nancy Pelosi Way. Most exciting and most amazing to me, she has trained thousands of leaders in almost every state and 4 foreign countries. She is in the forefront of training our candidates for the U.S. House. And that's like my favorite thing that you do, Christine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. So good to be here. And I was in a yoga class and the teacher, Yogi, said that our biggest enemy is our unguarded thoughts. And I said, well, gee, for me, it's the Supreme Court, but then it's my unguarded thoughts after that. Or maybe it's my unguarded thoughts about the Supreme Court. But yeah, I'll tell you, it's been, when you see something coming, it's going to happen. As Hitchcock said, the anticipation of a bang is worse than the bang. This was the anticipation moment where now we just know at any moment the bang is going to happen. And it doesn't matter how many years you've been preparing for it. I had, like so many other people, I had, flashbacks to being in law school and doing clinic defense with my roommate who was getting her master's in public health at Berkeley. And we were doing clinic defense then. That was the 90s. I remember protesting the Casey decision. I mean, now we all love it, right? but we didn't love it when it came out. We were protesting that. So it just goes to show you, yes, you said, and that's only half as long as this fight's been going on. But in my whole adult life, just being an advocate for women, and also being on either on a nonprofit board or professionally as an attorney, working with vulnerable victims. Obviously, it shouldn't matter why you want to have an abortion, but it is especially painful when you are trying to make that decision amidst all the other piles of shame that they put on you for being pregnant, or for being pregnant because you were sexually assaulted. So there are so many layers to this. And I just know that if that's just what's happening in my own unguarded thoughts, I can only imagine that multiplied by millions. And of course, I have the ability to do what I can for my daughter. And as I was sitting with her late last night, kind of reading with her before she drifted off to sleep, and she's 13. And I was thinking, man, we're lucky to be in San Francisco, but I just refuse to live in the world where my daughter has fewer rights than I do. And we have to fight for, all of those families that are in, they're not white, they're not privileged, they're not in the beautiful pro-choice state of California. Right. And we just have to do everything we can to codify Roe and to make sure that her choices and her liberties are stronger than mine, not weaker.
Yeah, it just bears repeating that this will disproportionately affect, undoubtedly, people who of lesser privilege, people who, are in worse situations. Maybe they're mothers already, maybe they are single mothers already, and they cannot afford, to have another child. Perhaps they are a victim of rape or incest. Perhaps they're too young to access what they need, and many of them will not be able to go to California, will not be able to travel to Canada or somewhere else where they can, so like it's just, it's horrific, and it's just that much more horrific for people of lesser means. So.
Yes, and it's that much more powerful for the women, particularly the Black and Native and Latino-led groups who are working with the most vulnerable populations in the most vulnerable states. You look at, like, if Roe versus Wade were to be overturned, and if the Senate does not step up, and the so-called pro-choice Republicans in the Senate don't step up and codify Roe, immediately you're looking at 16 or 17 states that have what they call trigger laws, where they would automatically revert back to a very severe, extreme abortion ban. So that work is being done right now by providers and groups. So I think it's really important, as people are watching, and as you put up, you throw out links and things like that to, to the viewers. It's really important that, I love Planned Parenthood, I love NARAL. They always, come and participate, and that's great. But we're talking about Sister Song. We're talking about groups that are in the South, led by Black women who are suffering under the worst of these bans, states like Mississippi, for example. So I think it's really important that we lift up the voices. We also step aside and make sure that we're giving our microphones or our Twitter feeds or our platforms to people who are actually doing the work with no margin.
Right.
Okay, Christine, I'm for those of us who've been sort of in this electoral space for the last couple of decades, it's been frustrating to see Republicans be so effective at using the Supreme Court as an electoral tool. Well, our side was always like, there was a complacency around Roe and around abortion rights, and Democrats, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, were unable to weaponize the Supreme Court as a campaign issue, as a way to galvanize our voters, and to the point where I don't even think Republicans believed the rhetoric on abortion. Right? It was just a really convenient way to gin up their base, their Christianist base, get them out to the polls, but they weren't really going to make that happen. And the way that sort of Mitch McConnell and his people are reacting to this, right, trying to focus on the process of the leak as opposed to the substance. They're not celebrating. You notice that they're not celebrating. Sort of suggests that that's the case. Do you really think that Democrats really didn't think this day was going to come, and that's why they weren't able to emotionally bring this issue into the campaign space?
Well, interesting that you use the term emotionally, Markos, because I brought it in all the time and I was told I was too emotional. So there you have it. Maybe I wasn't emotional enough, so look, when it comes to social media, stuff like that, especially at a time like in the first, 2, 12, 24 hours of something like this, I think you have to give people their space to grieve, to vent, to yell, whatever, to chide, to blame, whatever. You kind of have to get through that and get it out of your system and then say, okay, my mom, Nancy Pelosi, always says, don't agonize, organize. I'm like, well, we can agonize a little, but now we got to organize. Fueled by it. But, it's really interesting to me was I always thought, like, I grew up in the California Democratic Party. So for me, it was always an issue. And I remember my mom, her parents were from Baltimore. And I remember like in 1982, they had the California Democratic Party platform. It was 4 pages. By the time I chaired it, it was like 30, 30 years later. But in 1982, the Democratic Party platform actually was, it was like a nuclear freeze. It was an assault weapons ban. It was a lot of pro-environment as an ethic. It was jobs, justice, working conditions, and it was pro-choice. And my grandparents called and were like, you're for killing babies. I mean, they were completely freaked out. So in 1992, I go to this 500th anniversary of Columbus Day. You can imagine. I'm like, oh, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. And they're like, no, it's Columbus Day. So we're having this argument at the table. This is why they don't like to invite me to too many things. Speaking of emotion, I'm having that argument with my grandmother. And then she points out a woman across the room and she says, oh, she won on that abortion issue. And I go, oh, well, okay, I'm about to be 0 for 2, right? And so I kind of started gently. I said, well, Grandma, sometimes, they say if you can't trust me with a choice, you can't trust me with the child, which was the 1992 bumper sticker of the time, right? She says, oh, no. And sometimes it can be a sin. And I'm like, wait, okay. So in 1982, you were completely opposed. 10 years later, my grandmother had become pro-choice, still anti-abortion, but pro-choice. And so I think that evolution really occurred. If it could happen to my immigrant Italian grandmother, it can happen everywhere. And it did happen everywhere. And I still think that we have to be very careful and specific in our language because we allowed them to say they're, anti-abortion and we're pro-abortion. No, some of us are pro-abortion, but millions of Americans are anti-abortion and pro-choice. And some of the most powerful messaging around the time when I first became chair of the California Democratic Party Women's Caucus, I served for 10 years. I started a month after John Boehner became Speaker of the House. And the first bill, you remember, was to try to have the legitimate rape argument. Right. Remember all that? HR 1 and HR 3. And Barbara Boxer, then our senator, led to fight to stop them in the Senate. But the point was they were ready. They were ready. They called it a war. They were ready. They were prepared. And we knew that. But we also knew that some of the most powerful voices we had were people who said to camera, as example, the woman who was campaigning against Todd Akin and for Claire McCaskill in the race that she won for Senate, where she said, I was a survivor of rape. I wanted to have the child, but there's no way that I would want that choice taken away from me. And as chair of the Women's Caucus, like our bylaws said, we were pro-choice. And people would write to me and say, well, I just want to remind you, I am anti-abortion, but I think it's my choice, not the government's. And so I just want you to say at the meeting that we're all pro-choice and having a baby is one of those choices. And I would say it and on we would go. So I think that part of the Democrats writ large issue was we got too afraid to just have a conversation like the one I just had. We were too afraid that it was going to be weaponized, used against us. And quite frankly, it was something we thought, well, the lawyer people care about that, but regular people don't care about it. It was too much don't ask, don't tell, instead of privacy is something that you do alone. Justice is something that we can do together. And I think that there's a privacy group and a justice group in the party, and we're trying to bring them all into the same circle. But that's been a slow process. That said, there were a lot of people that came to Congress and said that they were anti-abortion. They found themselves voting to fund Planned Parenthood. They found themselves funding birth control in appropriations, fighting against all those poison pills. So again, I think there's been a positive evolution, but I'll be honest, it was 2016. We had a Supreme Court vacancy. We knew if Trump won, the two fights were going to be the Supreme Court and the Affordable Care Act. And if Hillary won, the fights were going to be the Supreme Court and the possibility that they would sneak in TPA. As a farewell present to Barack Obama and Paul Ryan, I should say the TPP, the trade deal that
with Asia.
didn't like.
Yeah.
Right. So, you said in there about Republicans, they were ready, right? And I wonder if Democrats are ready. You spend time around candidates, you do some trainings, do you think Democrats are ready for this moment? And this is a terrible moment, but it's a political moment. And, as you well know, if we have a House majority and we have, enough seats in the Senate, hopefully we could codify this into law, codify abortion rights into law. Do you think Democrats are ready for this political moment?
I think the base of the party is ready for the moment. I think the American people are ready for the moment. And I think the Democrats will rise to the moment. Many of us are. And many more of us are than 10 years ago. Many more of us are than 20 years ago, certainly more than a generation ago. So we're getting ready. I would also say that it's the confluence of interest. If you look at what I found interesting about what's in this leaked decision, if you go back to the oral arguments, one of the things that Sotomayor talked about, Justice Sonia Sotomayor talked about during the oral arguments was the stench, right? The stench that was going to come from the Supreme Court from this Texas bill, right? If the Texas ban, now this is also looking at Mississippi, but as to the Texas ban, she said, if it looks like we're just doing politics here and throwing out all these reasoning, I don't know if the court can survive the stench of this. But part of her concern was not only Roe and Casey, it was also the other cases that talk about fundamental rights and the dignity of privacy. So the one thing that the Democratic Party has also evolved on is LGBTQ equality. And so we are well-versed in marriage equality. We are well-versed in that. That's been helpful. We're well-versed in birth control and the fight over Hobby Lobby and not my boss's business. We're well-versed, unfortunately, in the current threat to our trans community and our trans kids and what's going on in the schools and what's going on in some of these terrible, again, go back to Texas, these terrible rules that they're coming up with. So I think that on abortion alone, we're pretty good. But what's really powerful is that we see the interconnectivity of all these intimate decisions that are being threatened, of all of this autonomy that's being threatened. And therefore, you have to believe that we know, and even if every Democratic Party official like me and public official didn't know, they're hearing it over the last several hours. And I think the collective decision is that we want to be really smart about this. We want to be really inclusive about this. And we need to understand that we can't wait till November. There will be poison pill after poison pill after poison pill that is happening in the state budgets, most of whom close their books at the end of June, in the budget for fiscal year 2023 that has to go through the United States House and Senate, the appropriations bills. We have to have our warriors and be at the ready. And it's like whack-a-mole. When somebody sees it comes up, the rest of the party has to join them in saying, this is a problem, and where we can snatch 2 or 3 Republican votes that might be left in Washington for this.
So I'm gonna quote from the draft decision. It's clear that Alito's feeling a little insecure about the fact that he's a man, basically taking a woman's right away. So he tries to sort of weaponize feminism in a decision. And he says, quote, "Women are not without electoral or political power. It is noteworthy that the percentage of women who register to vote and cast ballots is consistently higher than the percentage of men who do so." So he is basically daring us. He's daring women to do something about it. Now, of course, they're trying to pass a federal ban too, right? So it's, here he is pretending that this is all just a states' rights thing, right? But do you get the sense that this issue can be a decisive issue in November's elections? And sort of related to that, have you had a chance to talk to candidates yet that you're working with about how they're going to talk about this and what impact it may have? And I know it's only been a few hours, so maybe it's premature to ask that question, but do you have any sense of that yet?
A couple of things. First of all, that's bless his heart. The same man that gave us Citizens United, the same man that helped gut the Voting Rights Act, is now going to talk about, oh, don't worry, women, you can vote.
Yep.
It's actually women who have more voter suppression to deal with than less, because women who get divorced or married, therefore changing a name, have a more difficult time going through all those legal documents. I mean, I adore my husband, but there's no way I was taking his name. You think I was going to go through all that rigmarole, all that process? No way, right? Not legally. I wasn't going to do it. I think a lot of people are dealing with voter suppression, and a lot of them are women. So no, I don't. I think it is a dare, and I think we should take him up on his dare. But let's be clear. Remember during the Citizens United, when there was the brouhaha back and forth in the decisions before they were.
And Citizens United, sorry, Christine, Citizens United allowed corporate money, almost unlimited corporate money, or unlimited corporate money to flood into politics, and eliminated campaign limits on those corporate donations. Okay, sorry.
Right. They said it was speech. They defined corporations as having members for the purposes of speech, and it allowed, any LLC could spring up like a weed and then just suddenly give endless amounts of money, more so than an actual individual person. And one of the things that Scalia said when the progressives on the court were talking about that this would have a chilling effect on debate, he said, well, if you don't like it, you can just change the channel. So I feel like Alito is channeling Scalia in a sense of saying, well, if you don't like it, you can just vote to change the law. Well, we did vote to change the law, right? We voted for a Democratic Senate. We voted for a Democratic president. And, Mitch McConnell didn't give us our vacancy when Scalia passed, right? The other thing I would say is, yes, it should be a challenge, but it also should say to every senator, confirm everyone you can as quickly as you can right now, right? Because that's also the power of the Senate. We need those judges too. And another thing that I think in terms of us being ready, I was out in the streets for Merrick Garland, but I think that we were out in the dozens. We would have been out in the hundreds of thousands had they nominated a Black woman. And many of us said that. We had a couple of candidates that we took to the White House, and they didn't do that. So I think part of what you're seeing is that the party is learning. There's a difference, God love them both, between Merrick Garland and KBJ, right? Ketanji Brown Jackson is a different kind of candidate.
Close.
It's not even close.
Right. But it's also a matter of what you will do for the person. So I would say our candidates, we'd already been talking to them about this issue. In fact, I had tweeted about the issue in the morning, that Washington Post article that had come out that talked about the huge dark money network that was out there that was planning to codify Roe in the House. Normally, people don't see abortion as being an issue in the House. They see it as being an issue in the Senate because that's where the action is on the judges and, of course, the Supreme Court. But the fact of the matter is, it's important in both houses. And in this particular instance, I think our candidates are really clear. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of individual autonomy and power. And it is also a matter of respect for patients, right? If you're for patients' rights, then you should be for abortion rights. If you are for the right to choose, then that means everybody, regardless of class or race or gender identity, right? Or marital circumstance. And if you are going to campaign and be part of the Democratic Party, understand you are going there to fight and be part of a pro-choice majority. People may take issue with one, aspect or another, but by and large, we need to make sure that our candidates are strong. And I haven't seen much pushback there. I think most of them are very good about it. Again, I want to avoid the backsliding of the people, the infamous 7 words they used to say, I'm personally opposed to abortion, but I'm pro-choice. Just say you're pro-choice, right? And I also want to avoid some of the shaming that goes on when we start talking about what kinds of abortions should be legal or not. Just codify Roe. You've got the case law. It's right there in front of you. We've all lived with it for 50 years and for 20 years or so since Casey. So just codify Roe. That's your message.
Do you think that a lot of these Democrats who are in dicey districts, in swing districts and suburban districts and whatever, it seems to me that this would work to their benefit, to be talking about, we can codify Roe, we can protect this from the Supreme Court that's going to strike it down, or that just struck it down, depending on when they're campaigning, et cetera. So, do you think that this is a net plus at this point for Democrats running in swing districts, and particularly these suburban swing districts?
I think this is a horrifying negative. I think it's really, really bad. I think the shock is only just starting to wear off. And I think because it's such a personal, painful decision, we want to be really careful about how we go about looking at where it would have electoral advantage or disadvantage. Yes, it's going to piss people off. Yes, it's going to get people out and voting. Yes, women know who's on their side. Patients know who's on their side, right? Just like the LGBTQ community knows who's on their side, right? That much will be clear. I also want to just put in a word for those who are coming at this from a place of trauma, because what I don't think would be helpful is to add to the unhealed grief and the long COVID and the trickle down hate. We don't have trickle down liberty. We don't have trickle down economics, but we sure did get trickle down hate from the last administration. So I would just say we want to be careful about making sure that it is a net plus that Democrats know that our base is furious. They're furious with us. They're furious with themselves. They're furious with this country. And we have to honor that pain. And I'll say about this issue the way I said about the recall of Gavin Newsom a year ago. You have to begin with empathy, and then go to the place of, now who's going to take care of your pain? Who has a plan to heal your pain? Who has a plan to solve your problem? Who has a plan to make your life better? I think that's the Democratic Party. But I would just hope that this is done with a tad of nuance and a lot of care, because yes, it's a bumper sticker, right? My body, my choice. Who decides you or them? Vote pro-choice, vote Democratic. Like, we get that. It's actually easier to campaign on than other issues in that respect. But there are a lot of scared people who are going to be in a lot of pain and potentially die between now and November. And we should never forget that. And as with COVID, I think we want to just make sure that we're always being mindful of the vulnerable patients, the patients with disabilities, the patients from communities of color. And so I kind of just slow down in my answer to say, let's just make sure that we're leading with that empathetic heart and with input from the people who are most impacted, so that what the public sees is that we care about them, because we do,
right?
As opposed to the public seeing us go out there and say, get rid of those terrible anti-choice Republicans. And then they see our own base yelling at us and saying, well, we wouldn't have to if you had done your jobs, right? And we get an endless cycle of doom about the filibuster.
What I'm hearing from you is something that we've been talking a lot about in recent shows about messaging, which is you start by stating your values and what you're for, and then you say, and what is the other side going to do for us? Because going to do for you? What plans do they have to help you? Because at this point, their only plans are the culture wars. So that's it. There's no plans to help with healthcare. There's no plans to help with reproductive rights. There's no plans to help with inflation. There's no plans to help with anything. So anyway, we've been talking about that, and I'm hearing you tell me, slow your roll and get back to the messaging. So anyway,
yeah, no, it's true.
I'll take it.
Yeah, because you know what, I think people are. This is a very painful personal thing. We're talking about personal dignity here, and so I do think it's important. And I mean, I talk faster than you do. I mean, my poor court reporters, they just hearing me talk a mile a minute and having to record that. But the fact of the matter is, because it's a very personal thing, because it's a very intimate thing, we want to talk about that. So when we talk, for example, about the kitchen table, yeah, we're talking about hospital bills and we're talking about rent, we're talking about economics, but we're also talking about the things that if you're lucky enough for your kids to still talk to you at the table and not, just put on their headphones and eat the food and race out. They're also talking about, the trans kid getting bullied, or their friends who are immigrants who are worried about, the racism that's still there, or somebody, has been absent in school for a while and they're all pretty sure it's COVID, but nobody's saying, right? Or the person that got embarrassed because, they had their period at school and they're dealing with period poverty and the school is just not, equipped to deal with that. So they need some help. I mean, there's, I don't want to distinguish too much between the culture and the economics, and the race, because I think they're all linked. And I think that when we talk about that kitchen table, we should really remember that we talk about these really deep personal issues just as much, if not more, as we talk about the financial ones. And oftentimes there are links. For example, do I tell my boss I have COVID? Do I tell my boss I have cancer? Do I tell my boss I'm pregnant? At what point do I do that? Will I get fired? Will I get quietly, constructively terminated? Will I even get insurance? Right? These are fights that people have in places where they don't have the strong protections that they need. So I think our messaging is really important. We are a pro-choice party. We are a big tent party. We care about making people's lives better. And that includes, of course, making sure we have jobs and wages and some relief from all of this burden that people are suffering. But part of that relief is financial, and part of that is really emotional. And so I think we have to give the base a chance to be mad at us, right? Give people space to vent and not co-opt that or try to control it, but instead do more of the crowdsourcing. And, I would just say, in finalizing the answer, Markos, you had, I told somebody I was going on your podcast and they're like, oh, the American Taliban guy. Like, people are still tripped out that you were so honest and direct about calling it like it is. But now that we're starting to see it in action, like it's less of a radical description than it was, which is at congratulations on your prescience, but also a little depressing.
No. I don't want the congratulations. I wish I had been wrong. Christine, I know we're out of time, but it just really, really quick. I know you've got your hands in so many different things. Is there one thing you want people to do? Something they can actually tangibly do to join the fight and try to win in November and reverse them.
What you can do is support your local grassroots organizing. And if you are blessed enough to be in a place where after you organize for yourself, you can organize for others, then work on holding the House and holding the Senate and holding some of these seats in these nested communities, right? Going to what we call red California or purple California, but also looking at places like Michigan, where they've got a contested governor's race, where they've also got a contested legislative race, and they will in the general election have some contested congressional races. Work in Florida, work in Texas, work in places where you have a blend here. But we've got to make sure that we hold this House. And to do that, we have to make sure we're getting out the word that, yes, the House did codify Roe once, they'll do it again, and they'll be able to do it next year too, and to fund a codified Roe if we have a Democratic majority. So hold the House.
Christine Pelosi is a strategist, organizer, and my favorite, she's a trainer of all these great candidates trying to save our democracy. Christine, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Keep fighting that good fight.
Thanks. Kerry, it's funny how she brings up American Taliban, because I almost forget. American Taliban is one of it was my second book, I believe, that I wrote, where I basically compared the Republican Party to the Taliban. And this was back in, when was it? It was like 2008 or 2009. And I got so much shit from people, from liberals. Like The Nation
Really?
attacked me, and American Prospect attacked me, and all these liberals, they were like, heavens, like this rhetoric. And what I literally did is I would take a speech by a Republican or a speech by a Taliban leader, and I would take out sort of the cultural references that would identify it. And I'd be like, okay, which one is it? And you wouldn't be able to tell, right? On gay rights, on abortion, on contraception, and all these sort of issues that we care about, on democracy even. And just pointing out these come from the same place. And it's fun. I'd almost forgotten. It's funny that Christine brought that up and that she remembered the shit I took back then. Because every day, the last, I don't know, decade, right? It just every day seems to confirm the tenet.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, it's prescient. I mean, except that it was happening. So, it's just like, well, in a way it was, I mean, it was prescient in terms of where they were heading, but it was already happening. And what you were doing was just pointing out, hey, this is already happening. Like, this isn't, I'm not making this up. Like, it's happening if you're willing to just see it for what it is. So gosh, I am, it's like, I want to talk about the politics of this, the electoral politics of
this. We can talk about it. We're not trying to get votes. So
I know. I think it's fair. I mean, first of all, can I just say, you mentioned at the top or closer to the beginning about McConnell, and McConnell's, a bunch of these Republicans in Congress in particular saying things like, oh gosh, this is just such an outrage because it was leaked and all this stuff, right? Well, and not touching any of the substance of it. Well, McConnell is the guy who packed this court with conservatives, who stole a seat from Democrats. And if it turns out that he isn't, that he gets that Republicans, particularly in the Senate, in these statewide races, get swamped because or at least their chances of taking a majority get sacked because that in the suburbs, they have trouble because a bunch of women turn out and hopefully some men too, and say, there's no way we're going back to this. And I mean, there's going to be a lot of, I'm not just saying it's just suburban. I'm just saying that the suburban voters are really the swing voters. If we can get the Democratic base out en masse and get the suburban swing voters at the same time, because they're like, there's a lot going on. But one thing I know is that someone's trying to take away my rights. And if he ends up not getting to be majority leader again in his lifetime because of this, that will be some sweet fucking justice, is all I have to say.
God, that would be amazing.
So, and that there is that possibility. This guy's old. I mean, I don't know how many years he's got left in him, but it's possible that this becomes a decisive issue, not just for one cycle, but for many cycles. And, especially for women. And I will say, as someone who was covering the LGBTQ movement when Proposition 8 passed in California and same-sex marital rights were taken away from Californians here. And at the time, I wasn't living in California. I am now. But there's something about having rights taken away that is
viscerally.
And viscerally, it's so visceral, and it's not something, it's not a one cycle issue. It's not like, oh, well, vote on it this cycle, but next cycle, I don't know, maybe I don't want the rights next cycle. I mean, it is going to be here for a while, and hopefully it's going to be as big as I think it's going to be. But like, the prospect that that's what you're facing is a place where women don't have the right to make the choice about their own healthcare issues, regardless of what the circumstance, then, I don't want to live in that. I don't want to live in that place. Now, I live in California, and there's, abortion rights are going to be strong here, but I don't want to live in that country. I don't want my daughter to live in that country. I don't want people to have to live in that country. And I think I could be overestimating, but I think there's a lot of women who don't want to live in that country.
I mean, there's so many facets to it. Texas, has a fast growing tech community. Are they going to be able to attract creative class people to move to Texas, to a state that is so regressive on women's rights? So there's some places where the politics of it are going to get complicated, but that's not going to happen in Mississippi and Alabama. Nobody's moving down there, and there's huge classes of people there that just won't have access to reproductive services because of laws like this. And it's clear, and I keep coming back to it because I'm just absolutely gobsmacked, is how Republicans like Mitch McConnell don't want to talk about that. They really are afraid to talk about the substance of the decision. They're not celebrating. The ones that are celebrating, you're like, okay, that guy's a true believer, and good, he should celebrate. They won. They got what they wanted. But the ones who aren't, the Republicans who claim they were for this, why are they not celebrating? I mean, it would be like the Supreme Court leaks a decision that says that, okay, you know what, we're going to make Washington, D.C. a state. Would we sit here on this show and complain that it was leaked?
Yeah. No.
Oh my God.
Well,
yes.
And to your point, the Republicans in these red states, like Governor Kay Ivey in Alabama, right? I mean, they are celebrating. So like, it's the Republicans in the red states. They're out there celebrating. They're saying, we're going to take away, permanently take away abortion rights. If they haven't passed a bill already, and most of them have, they're going to pass that bill. The politicians, the Republican politicians in these red states are all over it. But McConnell knows that his Senate majority doesn't run through the red states necessarily.
Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida. There's one more in there. I mean, New Hampshire, Nevada. It's all the swing states.
It's all the swing states, right? He knows that. So I think about. I think about the Georgia becoming a swing state in this past election, which you've been talking about for years, and Arizona too. And I think about a place like Atlanta and the Atlanta suburbs and how decisive they can be in an election. And, there's a lot of things at play in Georgia, too many to mention in one. But like, I just think about the Democratic base voters who will turn out because they're going to have Senator Raphael Warnock, who's the first, Black American to represent that state, Georgia, in the U.S. Senate. And they're going to have Stacey Abrams as a Democratic governor. And then you're going to have the suburban swing districts, right? That said no to Trump. No to Trump. Some of them went there and voted for their down ballot Republicans, but said no to Trump at the top of the ticket. Some of them actually split their ticket. Those are the people who I think. I mean, that's a state where I'm like, there's the voter suppression bills, but there is going to be a great effort to overcome them. It shouldn't have to. It's immoral that the voters there would have to overcome it. But there's going to be a lot of motivation for both the base and the swing voters to say no to where the Republican majorities and in that state. But also, I mean, I shouldn't say the Republican majority. It's run by Republicans. The state is, but to where the Republicans nationwide are trying to lead this country. That's and that's their biggest. That's in the Senate. That's their biggest pickup opportunity is in Georgia. So
yeah, Kerry, that's all the time we have today in our show. I'm fired up. I thought I was motivated, but I just kicked into this new gear, and I suspect when the official decision comes out, I'll kick into that even next gear. And I think Republicans are pissed because this has given Democrats an extra month of organizing and fundraising. And Christine Pelosi, thanks so much to her for joining us. She's absolutely right. This is a time to join your local grassroots organization. If you're within driving distance of a swing state or swing district, it's a good time. So for example, you're in Chicago, not a lot of swing stuff happening. There's a lot of swing stuff happening in Wisconsin. So there's almost all of us are within driving distance and definitely phone call distance or writing letters distance. There's so many ways we can be engaged. And usually we start talking about how to get engaged closer to the election, but I don't even think we have that we can't wait. There is so much at stake. The election is 6 months out, 5 months out.
Yeah. That's
going to go like that. And of course, summer's in the middle. So we have to be active, and this is your opportunity. If you're watching the show, if you're listening to this podcast, you are already presumably incredibly activist type. So this is time to make sure that your family knows what's happening, that your friends know what's happening, your coworkers, your social circle let them know what's at stake, and that this is not an exaggeration. There's no hyperbole. Alito made it very clear that he only believes in historical rights, and that does not include anything that isn't a white male landowner. That's his definition, essentially. All of that is at stake, including specifically right now a woman's right to choose and a family's right to plan their family. That's everybody, not just women. A family's right to plan their family. So thank you, Kerry. Again, thanks to Christine Pelosi for joining us. Thanks to the whole brief team. That's Walter and Kara and Dorothy and Carolyn and Paul. And thank you, our fellow traveler, fighting this fight for our democracy and for our freedom. We need you to give it all. We can't leave anything on the road. And I know it's early, but the time can't wait anymore. Everything's at stake. So thank you for joining us. See you guys next week.